Today, we delve into Arundhati's fascinating exploration of the divine feminine, her anthology, Wild Women, and the intersection of spirituality, sexuality, and creative expression. Arundhati, welcome to the space. It's absolutely a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sneha. It's the morning here in New York, which is where I am, but there was something so special about joining you and seeing at least the faces that I can see, just for some reason made me feel instantly at home. Each one of those faces. I hope more of you just allow us to see you on video. It's a strange sense of homecoming. Thank you.
Absolutely. So today we're discussing this, basically getting into the space of wild women and understanding. For me personally, when I read your book and when I came to your space, the book Wild Women made me feel like I've had a blessing of thousands of women, thousands of men. It felt like this voice which you were waiting to hear and a guiding light saying, don't worry, this is all valid and you're on the path. And sometimes when you're on this path of your spiritual journey, on the divine feminine journey, and when you're holding space for all of humanity, it gets challenging. It's very challenging. The kind of concepts you have to break, the kind of limited understanding you have to let go. It's almost unexplainable that this is something you happens on the path. But this book and the kind of soul touching poems of these women and even men felt like, okay, you are safe, you're protected, and it just gave me that beautiful validation, much needed. And yeah, thank you so much for bringing this together.
Thank you for saying that, Sneha. And the reason I say that is, as a seeker myself, I've spent years feeling like one is walking a path that has not been walked before, when in fact it has, in all kinds of very singular ways. Each one of us, of course, brings our own uniqueness to the way we walk it, but it helps to know that others have made journeys before us, that they've left behind clues, that they've left behind signposts, and that you can stumble upon them when you least expect it. To me, that sense of pastness, a sense of continuity, can be a great sense of sanctuary, I think, for seekers particularly, who can often feel that they're walking on a journey that makes them feel very alone.
Absolutely. And that's something which, was like lost wisdom. We do not have this understanding nowhere. Before I actually read your book, I had very limited understanding. I mean, I did know some of these beautiful women, but I didn't know there were so many. And that was so amazing. And so many aspects of human dimensions were explored. So what?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just going to respond to what you were saying. You're absolutely right. Some of us know, of course, we've grown up hearing of Mirabai, for instance. Many of us have heard of Andal. All of you there, perhaps, many, I don't know how many Kannada speakers there are, but Akka Mahadevi and several others we are familiar with. But the point is the way in which they come down to us, even these figures that we believe we ostensibly know, even these figures have come down to us in a state of, they've been flattened into hagiographies. So we see them as these beatific, obedient songsters, sometimes a bit sentimentalized by calendar art. We don't really see them as women of nerve and blood and doubt and confusion and rage and passion. We don't see them that way. So part of this was to return to the poems where we actually feel the fire all over again, And then, of course, it is also about what you mentioned, several other women who have been largely undocumented, reclaiming them for ourselves so that we have a sense of ancestry. We haven't come from just a bunch of groveling, devotee is a big word. It's a wonderful word. I don't want to use the word lightly, but I think, the sense of a spineless bunch of women, our foremothers, those are not our foremothers. Our foremothers are pioneers. Our foremothers are those who asked difficult questions and who walked very difficult journeys as well, but were willing to do it because they weren't willing to barter their freedom for security. They were women who staked their lives on their questions. To me, to be able to see them that way was empowering.
Exactly. This kind of brings about that how, like when we talk about a human spectrum, a woman's spectrum, it's so much. But somehow, I don't know how traditionally, even when I dive deep into the ancient wisdom, I realized that, goddesses, feminine was revered at the center of the culture. But when we look at our own selves, we understand how many parts of ourselves we have suppressed, how many areas. I mean, there's only this one aspect which is all, like you said, of being plastered or being a certain way, which is out. But what about those raw emotions? What about those spaces which are deep and not necessarily our own, but feels generational, coming from our ancestors itself?
Yes, you're right. And I think, which is why it's so important for all of us, irrespective of whether we're male or female, it's important to have a sense of a history that is in some way a spiritual legacy that is balanced, that is not just skewed in one direction. I think all of us feel the pain of exclusions. All of us.
Yes.
There is no one who doesn't feel that pain. You don't have to be, there is, this distinction between perpetrator and victim. What we often forget in making those distinctions is that there is violence in both roles. And I think all of us have inherited a great deal of that pain and a great deal of a sense of that skewed history that disturbs us deeply. At the same time, I think we thrill immediately to reminders of a more balanced, more harmonized past. And I think, to me, that's what these women are. They're reminders that we've had some gutsy ancestors, gutsy, spirited, exultant ancestors. And it helps to know that. It's a legacy of joy above all else, a legacy of freedom and joy. It helps to know that.
Yes, it's like that reminder that, okay, yes, you have seen yourself as, and this exactly, our history is, we know of suppression, but what about this part? We have some incredible people. And we need to know that we need to honor these women so that we feel that yes, we are not just that small or timid or all that expression, but so much of largeness.
And I think what many of us have felt, I believe as well, Sneha, and thank you for your questions. They're really particularly sensitive and thoughtful. And I haven't had this sort of conversation very often before around this book, so I'm glad we're having it. I think what also happens for many of us is that it's not just about suppression of self. It's also about the many ways in which voices can be trivialized and the female presence can be trivialized. I think many of us feel that pain too. You can be included, but as a tokenism. You can just be the token guest at the table. That's a kind of pain as well. So I think it's important to acknowledge, to celebrate, but to also know the many subtle ways in which this, what you're calling today suppression, takes place. It's not just about saying stay voiceless. It's about saying, okay, maybe we'll include you, but we'll turn you into an ornamental presence in this history. I think that to me is also part of the problem, that so many of these women have been turned into decorative presences in our past. We don't see them as I said earlier, as full flesh and blood women who have hormones and hungers like the rest of us.
When we are actually walking this spiritual journey in spirituality, so many times it is like labeled into like, let everything go. You have to come into yourself. So you're going more into being, you can say, like a disciple, leaving all the wrongs and rights and coming into that. But it's not about always necessarily, kind of express that everything is a part of it. And that's the beauty which I understood even in the Shakta tradition. And while we're working and understanding the goddesses, that it's not that we don't mix with the material world, But so it's not that we keep ourselves away, isolated, go to the mountains, and just do sadhana. But it is this dance with the world. It is this connection with everything that is and working with it, that rather than separation.
I'd agree completely. And I think the goddess wisdoms are a reminder of that again and again. As I say in the book, the goddess doesn't stand aloof. She is the creator who has the courage to get involved in her creation. She gets her hands messy, bloody, soiled in the business of creation. You reach her through her. You do not, the path is not separate from the destination when it comes to the wisdom of the goddess. I think that's the reminder she offers us. And it's the reminder we need, I think, more than ever in our world today. She is not just the transcendent divinity. She is the immanent goddess. She is right here and now. And I think we need this more than ever because of the kind of fragmented ways in which we have been encouraged to look at our worlds and ourselves. The goddess is always a reminder that the path forward is not division, it's what I call delirium. She is the invitation to delirium. She's the invitation to the way that knows that there are really no binaries at all, though there may seem to be when you look at the world entirely through a limited prism of the mind. In the world of the heart, there are no binaries. And that's the invitation of the goddess.
Divine, really, it's so divine. And it's integrating this, I think, I feel what I've been doing in terms of the work also has been about, let's tap into the divine feminine first. Let's understand divine feminine. I keep insisting on that. The reason being that divine feminine gives you that access of honoring every single aspect of the self in the most nurturing way than any kind of domination or suppression. And this, if every human kind of gets access to, which is within us, this understanding of the possibility of the world being harmonious is so much more.
I agree. I agree. And I'd love to hear more about your own path and the work that you're all doing together. I just love these faces on my screen. It's lovely to see you all. But yes, I think for me, but we'll come to my own journey later. I don't want to talk about that. We'll talk about the book first.
You'd love to know about your journey as well. So I want to know about when you started this book, right? Like how you started it. What brought these voices together? What was your process? And how did you include these unique poems to, make this whole book? It's not just one aspect being covered, it's everything. So what was your inspiration? What journey were you on?
Yes, I think, I had an earlier book that some of you may know of. It was called Eating God, an earlier anthology, which was an anthology of Bhakti poets. And I've been, as a seeker, a very omnivorous reader. And I found that the question that kept coming up for me periodically is, where are the women? And when there are women, as I said earlier, why are we only seeing them as these sorts of plaster saints? Is there another way to hear them? As I say, I want to hear them refanged because they've been defanged, they've been rendered toothless, they've been desexualized. I wanted to hear them in all their power and resonance. So one of the things I knew I wanted to do when I embarked on this book was to have as many diverse women as possible within the Indian subcontinent, women poets. So there were, I wasn't just going in a schematic way as in I need to include one from here and there. Not like that, but I wanted it to just be as plural as possible. So on the one hand, you have the Bhaktas in this book, but you also have the Buddhists and the Vedantins and the Sufis and the Tantrikas. I wanted room for as many spiritual orientations as possible. But I also wanted women of the mind, and I wanted women of the heart, and I wanted women who acknowledge the body, and I wanted women who are homemakers. I wanted women who are nuns. I wanted women who are mendicants and travelers. And I wanted women who were sex workers and courtesans. I wanted just the whole gamut, just to be reminded personally that there are so many ways in which these journeys to the self can be made. and I think that became the overriding criterion. Do these voices hold do they add something resonant in terms of poetry, or do they add something resonant in terms of the life journey that has been made? That was the criterion primarily.
So many of your poems and the poems that are here have expressed this raw, uninhibited spirituality, which often challenges societal norms. So, how do you see these women, using poetry as a tool for transcendence and authentic self expression? And during those times, especially when it was so much more like, I don't know if that time was more progressive and now we become regressive, but I felt like the spirit of the woman was free at that time. But yeah, so how did they do this? How did they how do you see these women using poetry as a tool of transcendence?
Mm-hmm. I think I'm not going to be in a hurry to say that those times were better or worse, but certainly there were many of them talk of the odds that they had to battle against. Many of them speak of it. But to me, as I said, the point of this was not to romanticize their journey. I don't want to romanticize their journeys. They were women like you and me, and sublime sometimes and not so sublime at others. They were us. They were us, as raw, as bewildered, as wondering as we are. And to me, that smell of bewilderment is also important. And that's there. I hope it's there in some of the poets in this book. I was interested in those, however, who also asked some inconvenient questions. So when I think of someone like Punnika, the slave girl, 2,500 years ago, empowered by the Buddha's teaching of self-determination, she is able to accost a much older, ritualistic, orthodox Brahmin and ask him some ringing questions about purity and karma and change his way of looking at the world forever. And I wonder at this young girl and what empowered her. And we know, all of us know, that these moments of empowerment do not come easy. So this is coming from a very deep place of self-transformation. Punnika could not have asked those questions had she not undergone that inner transformation herself. So to me, a figure like Punnika, 2,500 years ago, or someone like Tarigonda Venkamamba in the 18th century, a Brahmin widow who brazenly wore vermilion and colored apparel and, asked difficult questions of the establishment. The elders were scandalized by her. They took her to the pontiff of their time, in the Shankaracharya of their time, and asked her to bow before him. They wanted to tame this woman. This woman said, "I refuse to bow." They were even more scandalized. Finally, she asked him to rise from his seat, and he did. She then bowed before the seat, and we are told in a wonderful story that is apocryphal probably, but doesn't matter. We are told that the seat went up in flames. To me, these are reminders of essentially untamable women. And whether it is Punnika or whether it is Tarigonda Venkamamba, whether it is Soirabai, an 18th century, much earlier actually, the 13th century, Soirabai is 14th century Dalit woman mystic who says, if menstrual blood makes me impure, tell me who wasn't born of that blood. This is a woman asking this question, raising questions about hierarchies on the basis of caste, gender, and the fundamental hierarchy between the human and the divine, centuries ago. Wow. These are, to my mind, astonishing women, astonishing. And so these are just three of many, many, many more. I think also of the other 18th century child widow, Shengote Abudeyakkal. I specifically want to mention names that are not well known. I didn't know of any of these women. Abudeyakkal, we are told, was a child widow, but in her poems, she asks questions about ritual impurity. She asks questions about why menstruation is impure. She asks questions about yetchal, the idea of saliva, being a source of contamination. She says, if saliva makes the world impure, then the very Vedas are impure because they come. That's how they are uttered. They're uttered with the use of saliva. So she said, basically saying creation is impure if this is your yardstick. What a legacy of voices, and how did we lose them? Why did we never hear them? Why were we never encouraged? These women were around, and sometimes they're still sung as folk songs in the regions that they inhabited. But why were we never encouraged to see this as a collective sisterhood? You know?
This is like, it just gives us that kind of strength to know that, yes, every single conversation, and these are conversations we as growing up also have within ourselves. And we still don't ask or talk about it because it's again like, okay, we don't know. And there is no reference. Okay, you can ask, you can speak, you can do. But knowing that these women powerfully just questioned, did not stop themselves and stood against the society, almost like Ma Kali, holding that energy against suppression. It's just beautiful to see that was their strength, and people would rather look at them differently than try to put any kind of chains on them, and they existed.
They existed, and we were encouraged to just see them as pious women, if at all we knew of them. Locally, some of us may have known of these people, but they were just known as the pious women of their times, not as the iconoclasts, not as the brazen women, not as the women who flouted norms, not as those, So we often feel then that our questions are just our own, and we are the first to be asking them. These questions have been asked again and again.
For years. Imagine if this book just comes, like we have this like at a very young age, this kind of understanding. It helps us break so many things that we otherwise feel so alone in.
Absolutely. I agree. I hope, in fact, in some way, that this book will journey into the lives of many people, just as a reminder of the fact that sacred does not equal goody-goody. I believed that growing up. I thought bhakti was a bunch of really devout, pious women who sit around in satsangs that I would never go to. Little did I know, and it's only when my own journey my own journey, all my existential questions took on a certain intensity, that I returned to these poets and I said, how on earth did I think that these were a bunch of, these were like goody two shoes? There's nothing goody-goody about this lot. These are people who are asking questions about an unappeasable lust, questions about hierarchy, as I said earlier. These are irreverent poets. So, when you hang around the bhakti poets, you're hanging around a bunch of people who might destabilize your life. But that's why you go there.
Take some part of you and take you out of that, that slumber. Otherwise, we find ourselves caught in. So, several poems in the collection also explore themes of eroticism and the body as a site of spiritual awakening. How do these poets navigate this understanding of, sexuality and spirituality?
That's a wonderful question. I think, I myself might have been one of those who believed that spirituality was all about becoming just a calm, beatific human being, to be nice to just have a shimmery halo around. And I hoped I would just turn into this wonderful, placid being, but it wasn't the case. And that's when reading these poets was so comforting. Whether it's Amrapali, the courtesan again, in the time of the Buddha. This is an aging courtesan. It's not the beautiful Vaijayantimala type courtesan. Movies. This is an aging courtesan looking down at her body, looking at the ravages of her body. She says, the Buddha was right. She says, the truth teller doesn't lie. He was right. It all goes downhill. At the same time, in the act of just mapping her body, there is a certain, I believe, I can hear it, that poem, not just heartbreak at the fact that everything is transient. I can hear pride as well. So to me, that pride of what the body is capable of is something that these women bring to the poems again and again. So whether it's Soirabai talking about menstruation, Amrapali talking about the body, or Sule Sankava, who's a Kannada woman mystic, who's also a prostitute, and who says, and this is to my mind there's one poem by her in the book where she says, yes, the men around me, they have to be appeased. I need to make sure the body is offered to the highest bidder. They have to be kept. There are sexual politics at work there. They have to be kept appeased. But for her God, she defines as Nirlajeshwara, the God without shame. This is a God whom you can go to with and share every crevice of guilt and shame that you might ever have had. Because this is a God who understands. This is not a God who judges. And to me, this idea of the shameless God is just so empowering. And I think this is what the women also remind us of. Whether it's Janabai who says, I eat God, I drink God, I sleep on God. She's talking about all the things that the body engages in. You have to eat, you have to sleep, you have to do all of that. But all of that involves God. I think what each one of them brings to mind again and again is that the body is an instrument of the sacred. It is not a barrier. It is not an impediment. It is not a barrier. It's the very basis of the sacred journey. To see the body like that, I think, is something that the women poets in a very singular way bring into our lives.
That's so beautiful. And even this understanding that the god was called Lajeshwar.
Without lajja.
Without lajja. So amazing. Because
fabulous. Fabulous. Really.
It's like, wow, such freedom in that. Can I pray to this God who's given me so much space, of just to be exactly the way I am.
The idea that this is not some, unattainable God you have to purify yourself in order to attain. This is a God who's as soiled and grimy as us, who understands what it means to be us, embodied, flawed, imperfect, yearning. This is a God who understands that.
And it brings that understanding that humanity and its diversity and acceptance of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I feel most of these women and the work, and even the Divine Feminine work, has been about interconnected music, understanding humanity, not at just that level of, like you said, okay, it's at the basic level where, we are being nice and kind, but at the deepest of level where we have those dark parts, we have those desires, we have those pain points, and we have experienced these sexual traumas, these different kinds of things in life. But can we honor them, and can we shift our perspective in a different way? And while diving into the book, that also became very clear that yes, there are different perspectives. There's a perspective where you're deeply connected with God only in a very sensuous way. And it's not wrong. It is, accepted. So that brings about healing at different levels.
There's a reason why we find so much of what we call bridal mysticism in these poems. That is, so many of the women mystics who speak of, a very erotic relationship with the divine. And many of the male mystics do too. Eroticism is an integral part of it very often. And it took me time to understand that the erotic and the existential are deeply connected. As I said, I wanted to become this tranquil human being at a particular point in my journey, and then found that I was writing, in fact, my poetry was suddenly turning terribly erotic, and I wondered what on earth was going on. And it took me time to see that you don't undertake a journey like this. It's not a closet journey that you can just undertake with one little part of your cerebrum and believe that it will not implicate all of you. So I think that's what these poems remind us of. It will implicate your heart. It will implicate the dark turbulence of your heart. It will implicate the many paradoxes of the body. It will implicate every part of you. You cannot just do it. All of you is at stake, basically. And to me, it took me time to realize that. I thought being spiritual was about turning into a little happy puff of vapor looking down at my
It's almost like you start the journey at one point, but you have to see through all of this, all of it. In the spiritual journey has been kind of misinterpreted. It's almost like there's this way or that way. But it's all, if you're on the path, I feel you will touch upon every single aspect of the self, everything that you have said, oh, this is wrong, or I don't agree, or within yourself you've judged, you will face it and you will have to see divinity in that too. There is no other way. How do you become whole?
I'm so glad you talked at the very start about, the importance of accepting the shadow and looking at the darkness, because I've had a couple of people, usually male, 2 or 3 men, who've asked me, why would you call it wild women? And I realized that some part of the self is actually uneasy at the notion of this wildness. And it's like, don't we want to become goddesses, which means, again, another kind of Lincoln perspective of what it means to be a goddess. Beautiful, auspicious in a particular way, not wild.
Non-sexual in a way.
Yeah. So it's like, why wild? And I realized, and when one woman asked me that question, she was the first woman to ask me that. And she said, should we not go back to the vernacular and see what word they use? And I said, well, Mirabai says Bavari. Whatever you want to call it. You can want to call it crazy, you go ahead. But the point is, the way I saw wild was, and I'm glad you mentioned the wild woman archetype, and the way you responded to that is, it is wild in opposition. If at all we must have oppositions, it is about not being easily domesticated. The problem is not with the hearth or the home or the domestic landscape. It is about not being domesticated, not being tamed. When I was a young student reading Jane Eyre, I remember reading this book, The Mad Woman in the Attic. And I realized that a 19th century novel had to present the other woman as this mad woman up in the attic. Wild does not mean psychotic. Wild does not mean losing control to the point of schizophrenic. But when Nammalvar's heroine is possessed by the divine, she turns sage-like, she turns profound. And I feel what these women are pointing to is that if we don't draw on the attic reserves that we often keep carefully concealed, if we don't draw on that, we can often end up just being insipid, toothless versions of ourselves. We need to draw on that and integrate that. That's the invitation of wild women. Not to be just this or just that, but to integrate that and become ourselves more fully, more wholly, more authentically ourselves.
That is so beautiful and so inspiring, and really the crux of the work that I even do at 9 Nights of the Goddess journey. Nothing else but this. That it's not, like you said, wildness is not, to be looked at in that bracket, that it is crazy, insane, but it is an honor. It is almost like you have this fire in your belly that you want to go beyond something, and you're honoring that with all your heart. You're going beyond certain mainstream narratives, certain ways of being, because you're done. You understand that this is not enough. This way of being is not it. There is so much more to you, so much more to this existence.
I think also, Sneha, many of us, because I think women often have an ability to be harmonizers in relationships. But if we often settle for a cheap harmony rather than a profound harmony, we end up being people pleasers. Many of us know what it's like to be people pleasers, So we often suppress or stifle questions that we might have because we want to please. Really, we'd like to live in a happier, more harmonious environment. But the risk of being that kind of people pleaser is that you often suppress this aspect. You often end up just dissipating or frittering away your own power, your own strength. And this had a deep impact on me when I first read this Christian theologian, Valerie Saving Goldstein, when I was in college. I remember her saying that if the sin, if at all we call it that is the obstacle on a spiritual journey for men, could be the ego. For women, very often, it is the fact that we give away our freedom too easily. We look to others for our self-definition. We really don't, we give away the ability to define ourselves. And I think this had a deep impact on me. When we talk of surrender, every spiritual tradition speaks of surrender. But what is the value of that surrender if you are giving away a self that you've not even been taught to prize? if you don't even see it as precious, what is the value of this surrender? So to me, these questions are important ones which in many ways differentiate the ways in which women walk the spiritual path, you know. And I think I'm very wary of using the word surrender too easily because, we've all picked it up from romance novels. And if we just then later immediately apply it to our spiritual journeys, it would be unfortunate, very unfortunate. It's important to reclaim your sense of self and then see what you want to do with it.
Exactly. It's almost like you do not have an idea of your expanse, your expanded state, idea of your potential, right? Because you're probably being in a certain way. But when you tap into this wild feminine archetype, when you tap into this understanding of yourself, you get that possibility of who you can be. And that from that place, you come into integration and be exactly who you want to express or be in this world, how you want to express in this world. But you need to know that side. You need to explore that part to reach that wholeness.
Yes, indeed.
In terms of, there are a lot of male poets, or even a lot of male worshippers who have connected with this divine feminine energy and spoke, and the kind of reverence they've had is almost like they have very personal experience with the goddess, right? And somehow, like when I talk about divine feminine and divine masculine, I feel there is this nature that even from in a man, like a man can awaken to this divine feminine in a very beautiful way, and somehow that becomes a source of power. So some of these poets have so much of reverence for the goddess, and the way they explain it, it feels more powerful than any kind of it's like they're owning the goddesses completely.
Yes. I think, having male poets was very important to me in the book because apart from the women mystics, who are one large component of the book, I wanted there to be room for protagonists, the women we see as characters in poems. And so many of the very memorable women characters are given to us by male poets. So whether it is Annamacharya, the 15th century Telugu poet, who has the goddess Alamelu Manga as the speaker in many of his erotic poems, whether it's him, who has a goddess who can say in one breath, she can say about her god, he's my master. And in the very next breath, she can say, he's my slave. This is the slippery terrain to which these women are inviting us to. The slippery terrain where you really don't know where man ends and woman begins. You really don't know where the human ends and the divine begins. You really don't know. This is a shape-shifting space. Anything is possible. So this is why Krishna in Narsi Mehta's poems, the Gujarati poet, Narsi Mehta has a poem where he has Krishna wearing a yellow sari and braiding his hair and sitting on a swing. What's going on here? What's going on here? Or you have Saleh Bega, the Oriya poet, who has Radha kicking Krishna out of bed. Or you have Bulle Shah, the great mystic of Punjab, who wears a sari and dancing bells and goes crazy. Or Basavarna, who says, I don't know whether I can be the bride and I can be the groom. What are they pointing to? To my mind, they're pointing to the fact that this is the game of otherness coming to an end. This is the place where all difference, after it is celebrated and acknowledged, all those differences are melting away. This is when duality becomes a festival, not a battle. Then there's Holi, there's Rang everywhere, and the poet Uddhava Das can say, who can tell who is the man and who is the woman in this ecstasy? That's the place that, it's a place of liminality, when nothing is as it seems. And the finest mystic poetry always brings us here, where we really don't know. That's why it's a dangerous space, because we really don't know. If we wear our identities too rigidly, too inflexibly, we might find ourselves a little afraid. Yeah. But on the other hand, when there is love, which is what is being implicated here, these are love poems. You're going towards your beloved. The beloved is coming towards you. You really don't know where you end and he begins, or he ends and you begin. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter.
It just becomes this one flow of conversation, one flow of understanding that everything is just this oneness and there's no separateness.
Mm-hmm.
It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful to have such profound understanding in, like in the book itself and in our culture and the world culture as well, where they have had that kind of reaching this space is divine rather than anything else. It's like it's probably the highest, like you said, it's the highest level of understanding that there is no separation, there's no definition, even in the most basic, which is your gender. So who's a man, who's a woman? All is left is the essence of that union, essence of that oneness. I think I've tapped into this through the journey itself, exploring all these goddesses of Navdurga, also starting with, Shailaputri, Brahmacharini, and the essence that they carry. When we tap into them, understand it's almost like a part of yourself which you're living, right? And then these different stages of evolution in a way.
Yeah, I think, this is really about, these are radiant living archetypes. They are not dead mythological figures.
Exactly. Yes.
They live. Someone said, oh, do you believe, I have a bunch of poems in a previous book on Shakuntala. And someone asked me, oh, are you also, there is a trend now to speak of mythic figures. And are you part of that trend? I was like, I'm not even interested in mythic figures. I'm talking about Shakuntala because she is my contemporary, because she walks with me and sometimes in me, and I see her everywhere. I mean, again and again. So these are archetypes. And I think once you get to the core of these archetypes, this place that illuminates them, you understand something about yourself, and it shifts the way you see yourself forever.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's been my experience with this work as well. To be able to, it's like almost dissolving dissolving those layers in various ways, and the archetype is nothing else but that expression which is within you, probably hidden, probably suppressed, but suddenly you get present to it and you're like, oh wow, I didn't know I had this in me, and I didn't know I have so much strength that I can walk forward with it. It's just so beautiful, like this journey of the goddesses of the divine feminine. I can really love to like go on speaking about these concepts, but I would love for you to share something for the young women, for the young men of today, who are seeking to connect with their spiritual power and embrace their authentic self. How should they go about it in your experience, as well as with the book that you've written?
I'd say the first thing is to not buy into this very tired, very tiresome binary of good and bad. If you try too hard to be a good girl or good boy, try too hard to be the bad girl or the bad boy, both ways, you're going to find yourself in places that are untrue. And if that's how you divide your world, it can be a very impoverished understanding of your world. So to me, the goddess is the great energized matrix. She is the amplitude of the womb that allows everything to exist. And she holds it all. The question is, how can we hold it all in a kind of creative equipoise that works for us? So I'd say ask those questions. Don't be afraid of committing your life to those questions. And above all, don't sidestep. Don't try to bypass the body. Don't try to bypass the mind. Don't try to bypass the heart. Try to find a way through it all and understand it all. Because this is not about leaving something behind. It's not about chopping off matter in order to become a puff of spirit. It is about embracing all that makes up who you are at this moment. And I think this is for me why Shakuntala became important in the poems that I mentioned to you earlier. I used to see her as a woman conflicted. She couldn't be at home in the ashram with Kanva Maharishi. She couldn't be at home in in the court, then where will she be at home? In the earth, on earth, or in the sky, where will she be at home? And I feel the only place she can be at home is in herself. And in that, she becomes the axis between earth and sky. She becomes the bridge between forest and court.
Wow. Wow. That's so beautiful. And I think everyone, when walking on this journey, like you said, is the questioning needed. And to see, it's not about, earlier mentioned also, not about fitting in. It's not about people pleasing, but it's about questioning and owning yourself. And these archetypes, I think, are a great reminder for us to come back to that beautiful understanding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would love for you to share about what are you up to and something from your spiritual journey, if you'd like to share, and what is the next thing that you're working on currently, and how can we know more about it?
The book prior to this was called Women Who Wear Only Themselves. And it's I hope some of you will pick it up if you don't know about it. It's a book of essays. It's 4 women, contemporary women, on spiritual journeys, very diverse spiritual journeys. One on the path of Tantra, one on the path of Nada Yoga, one who's a monk, and the other who walks naked. So 4 very different contemporary women in India, unknown women. I wanted them to be relatively unknown. That's the book that happened. Then came Wild Women. And now I think it's really about integrating these fascinating women into my own poetry. So I have a book coming out next year, my own poems. And these women had to leak into the poems. So there they are in a book that is called The Gallery of Upside Down Women.
Wow. Amazing. I'm going to pick up these books, even the one which you just mentioned, almost resonating and making that space of acceptance of all of humanity, acceptance of all the journeys, and without judgment, but holding that space of love, acceptance, and interconnectedness. All right, so we are almost at the end of our conversation, and this experience was really amazing. Firstly to have you, and there's this deep connection of understanding that at the level of how we're not separate as human beings, and how divinity and your spiritual life, your materialistic life can be an expression of divinity in itself in every moment. It's not separate. That is the feeling which this conversation has brought for us. If anybody from the audience, I would like to ask them if they have any questions, they can ask. I don't know, I'll just have a look.
And while you're having a look, I just want to say that it's been a particular privilege to be with this group and with you, particularly Sneha, because I've done a lot of readings from this book with literary audiences. So it is about presenting it largely in terms of, I never sidestep the sacred, but there's only so much time you can spend with that. To me, it is so important to be amongst people who understand the notion of the archetype at all, and the ways in which it can illuminate your life. So thank you. I feel very much at home here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It really was an honor to firstly have you. And like I said, even meeting you, I felt like it was like this divine moment where I in that moment, but because even on this journey, transitioning from states, and like I said, I delved into the divine feminine literally with the fire of my belly, literally with that, like enough. And I didn't feel like it was me. It felt like thousands of women saying that enough, it's time to go beyond this. Life is not just this, there's so much more, enough. And it just began with that. And everything has gracefully led one thing to another. And where I find myself today is those archetypes, they come. It's like, you have to be fierce. There you go. Ma Kali. She's right here. Yeah, you have to accept this. You have to accept this. There you go. Vast acceptance that you can't even otherwise describe. That kind of love and acceptance. So it's precious. Your book, in fact, gave those blessings and gave that validation and gave that knowing that there were several women before you, there'll be several women after you, and we are just holding each other's hands in a beautiful way. We're just holding ourselves together, that kind of a sense. So thank you so much. I mean, anything you would like to read from your book, like one poem or something which really, I know there's so many. Like, I myself can't pick any, one particular, but anything that's coming to you at this point.
Maybe Rupa Bhavani for today.
All right.
Rupa Bhavani is a 17th century Kashmiri poet, and I'm choosing her for one because her poems are very short. So, two very short poems. But for another, because she's a woman who is quite something. Here she is. She says, I have not bowed, I never will. The one who listens is resplendent within me. That is worship. That is what I do. I have not bowed, I never will. The one who listens is resplendent within me. That is worship. That is what I do. And in another very short one, she says, how do you recognize the enlightened woman? And she says, this is how. Should she be wearing ochre? Should she have her hair tonsured? How will she look? And she says, the ever alert plays and dances as others do. She decks herself, good clothes she wears, ever conscious herself is perfect. On Shiva's path, she becomes Shiva himself. This is what the women bring. She becomes that notion of you embody the divine. It's no longer the divine out there, up there,
Absolutely.
wherever. It's about embodying the divine.
This sums up the essence of our journey ahead. During this time of Navratri, we are going to be tapping into these aspects of the self, where we merge with divinity, where we see what comes in the way of our true essential nature. And this understanding of like Shiva within you, Shakti within you, divinity here. That's what we are here to really experience and honor. Because it is every bit of ourselves is divine, everything around us is divine, and life is a celebration in this moment. Yeah. So how do we always be here present fully, and enjoy what is? Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Arundhathi. It's such a pleasure to have you. And I really feel like having more and more conversations with you, and I will connect with you separately on this. I'm sure everyone here has experienced and understood that divine feminine is not a talk of the new, but it is from time and beyond, from ages. And it's really about time we honor that fully, totally, especially in our modern worlds where we've forgotten who we are truly.
I'm sorry, I just started looking at your chat section.
Yes,
and
please.
Diverted. But I just wanted to say, I wish this could go on longer, but I hope our paths will connect again, and maybe in person at some point.
I would love to. Yes. Yes.
Hi. I am so sorry to interrupt, but we do have a question.
Okay.
It just came in. So, shall I read it out?
Yeah.
I'm trying to track. I was just looking through. I'm going to get lost.
Okay, so this is Sneha. I'm not sure of how to frame this. Hope it does justice. As I work in this world, I'm becoming aware of this feeling of quiet power rooted in divine feminine. It feels slow sometimes, or even stagnant, but reveals a completely new perspective which seems to erase all that was before. How does one continue to be rooted in this as well as navigate a world that is so essentially linear in nature?
How wonderful, Neha. That's wonderful to hear. And the quiet that you speak of makes it feel very true. To me, even in this book, some of the most memorable poems are the quiet ones. There's the Buddhist nun, Patachara, who we are told, this is again 2,500 years ago in the Therigatha. She says she just goes into her room one day, she washes her feet before going in, watches the water flow down, goes into her room, pulls up the candle wick, and is enlightened. It's a very quiet, undramatic moment. And so the quiet that you speak of resonates very deeply. And I just want to say to you that one of the wonderful things about the goddess, and I'm going to quote from my book, if I may, I think one of the wonderful things about the goddess is that she grounds. She roots you deeply. So here is the line from the book that I wanted to quote. She refuses to be refrigerated in text and temple. She stands for anchorage in everyday sacredness, in the organic mess of life itself. She is the creator who dares to become her own creation, refusing to remain an unmoved mover or dispassionate conjurer. The goddess invites us to become conduits, not custodians of the divine. It's about becoming a channel for the sacred. It's not about becoming a gatekeeper. It's not about acquiring a new set of beliefs. It's not about saying, now I've converted. I used to be into masculine, now I'm into feminine. Nothing like that. It's just about embodying, allowing yourself to become a conduit of the sacred, not a gatekeeper, not a sentry, not a soldier, not a cultural policeman, none of that. You're just embodying the sacred and allowing that embodiment to become fuller, deeper, richer. That's all. And by doing that itself, you are that axis and you are that bridge. Nothing more needs to be done.
Wow. Beautifully summarized, and it touches the heart, this understanding. Just really, because it's the conduit, the word you use, being a conduit, being a channel. I think we are essentially that. Our essential nature is that. We just have gotten away from it. We just forgotten that that's our essential nature. We are channels. Every human is a channel, because it is through your presence that everyone around you is getting energized, is getting something there. So you are channels, natural channels. It's only the things that you've made real, only the things that we put as, I think, blocks on ourselves and make it too real, the world, this is what I have to do, success definitions, labels, that we go away from this being channel understanding.
Yes, and I think therefore, Neha, the slow way in which you talk of it being quiet and you talk of it being slow, I think both those are very good words and they're very good indicators of something genuine unfolding.
So my name is Shanti. So I don't know, the name got changed because I logged into my phone and I don't know.
Okay.
But thank you so much. That really answered it all. Thank you.
Thank you, Shanti.
All right. So we're looking forward. This is not the end of our meeting and this is not the end of conversation with Arundhathi Subramaniam. It's been an honor and it's just about beginning. I recommend, I'll be sharing the link of her books with all of you. It is time. It is time to own the deeper aspects of ourselves. It's time to know so much more about our history than what we've been taught. And I think her book is that reminder of the lost and forgotten wisdom. So I encourage all of you to pick up a copy and looking forward to deeply connecting with you, Arundhathi, over time. And yeah, let's see how this blossoms. Your presence was divine here. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for creating this, for putting in the work, for making this happen. I can't even imagine what all books, where all you must have dug this information out from. But truly inspiring as it now becomes a reference for so many of us as we walk this path.
I can't tell you how much it helps to hear that, because there were many moments on this part, on the journey of putting this tome together, when I was ready to give up. because it was so interminable, really. And there were so many rabbit holes and so many bottlenecks and so many impasses. I wasn't sure when and how it would ever cohere. So it helps so much to hear what you just said. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And looking forward to reading more of you and, learning so much more from you. Thank you.